Hi, I'm Pastor Scott. This is Extraordinary Connection, and thank you for joining me today. As I write this devotion, it is almost Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday is the day we remember Jesus at his Last Supper with his disciples in the upper room. Maundy Thursday is also the day we remember Jesus' betrayal by his disciple Judas and all that surrounds that part of the story. So I thought it'd be interesting for us to talk about Judas today, to see what Judas can teach us. Judas Iscariot was one of the 12 disciples, one of the 12 men that followed Jesus. Judas is mentioned in all 4 gospel books. And anytime you see something in all 4 gospels, or in just one gospel, keep a close eye on that part of the story. Judas is named by name in all 4 gospels, and that alone makes him someone worth paying attention to. Not all of Jesus' disciples are in all 4 Gospels. Not all 12 get mentioned like Judas does. So there is something different about Judas. We don't have a lot of mention of Judas in the Gospel stories other than surrounding the betrayal of Judas. It's hard then to know the character and person of Judas when compared to, say, Peter. Of the 4 Gospel writers, John is the most critical of Judas, saying in chapter 12 that Judas would steal money from the poor. But only John mentions that fact. And on the contrary side, Matthew 19:28, Jesus talks about 12 thrones for the 12 disciples, which would include Judas having a throne. Why Judas betrayed Jesus varies depending on the gospel writer. Mark offers no explanation, of course, but that's Mark for you. Luke says the devil entered Judas's heart and made him betray Jesus. Matthew says Judas did it for 30 pieces of silver, which in today's dollars would be about $200. Maybe that was motivation enough for him to betray his teacher. I don't know. John says the devil prompted Judas. It's a little bit different, but close to Luke's account. So because Judas's motivation is kind of mixed, depending on which gospel writer you turn to, historians and biblical scholars tend to fall into 2 camps around Judas. The first camp is the devil made him do it. Judas was corrupt, he was wicked, he was just an evil person, and betraying Jesus was a natural extension of his personality. But there's a second theory about Judas too. Some scholars think Judas, although misguided, wasn't really trying to betray Jesus. He was trying to kickstart the revolution. Remember, the Messiah in Jesus' time, the one who was to save the Jews, was thought and expected to be a military Messiah. The Jews were looking for another David, someone who would come at the front of an army, someone who was skilled in military tactics and strategy, someone who would forcibly expel the Romans from Jerusalem and would restore Israel to her former glory. We know Jesus was not that type of Messiah. But having walked with Jesus, having seen the miracles Jesus performed, and having lived with Jesus day in and day out for 3 odd years, and believing in his heart Jesus was the Messiah, the second theory goes Judas was trying to get Jesus to claim his mantle of messiahship. That if Judas put Jesus into a place of danger, the true Messiah, the warrior Messiah, Jesus, would appear and begin the revolution. So as the second theory goes, Judas wasn't trying to portray Jesus per se. He was trying to nudge Jesus into the role he was expecting Jesus to take up. Maybe then, instead of being evil, Judas is guilty of being misguided and impatient. Maybe what he's really guilty of is not understanding the ways and timing of God. And if that's the case, maybe then Judas is more like us than we'd like to admit. Too often we have our own plan and our own agenda for what God's work should look like, what God should do in our community or church, and when God should do it. We are confident that if things just get kick-started, then the change will happen. We are certain that the changes should happen right now, and we are certain how things will look after they begin. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes for the work of the kingdom to be done requires us to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And sometimes it is right now the right time to begin. But we need to be careful and prayerful. We need to be careful that we aren't being impatient with God's plan. Sometimes the actions we expect to happen take way longer than we think it should. And we need to be prayerful that we aren't misunderstanding what God's plan is in the first place. God often shocks us with how mission, ministry, outreach, justice, and assistance happens in our communities. So many times in my own life, God has surprised me where she shows up and how peace and love is created in ways I didn't expect or understand. Let Judas be a cautionary tale to us followers of Christ today. To be open that the Jesus we are expecting might not be the one that shows up, and his arrival might not happen when we expect. I'll see you next time at extraordinaryconnection.org.